Entire family vanished in 2001. 15 years later, police found a hidden door behind the fireplace. The years that followed were a blur of police reports, private investigators, and dead ends. Sarah Mitchell became obsessed with finding answers. She finished college somehow, though she couldn't remember most of those final semesters. Her grades suffered. Her friends drifted away. All she could think about was that empty house and the family that had vanished like smoke. By 2016, Sarah was 34 years old. She had built a successful career as an investigative journalist, working for a major newspaper 3 states away from Maple Street. Her colleagues knew her as relentless, detail-oriented, someone who never let a story go unfinished. What they didn't know was that every article she wrote, every mystery she solved for others, was practice for the one case she couldn't solve, her own. She kept everything, boxes and boxes of documents, notes, theories. Her apartment looked like a detective's office from a crime movie. Red strings connected photos on a corkboard. Files were stacked on every surface. Her laptop contained folders within folders of research. She documented everything in writing, as if putting words on paper could somehow bring her family back. But the truth was, Sarah was terrified. Terrified of what she might find. She had spent 15 years building an image of her family in her mind. Perfect parents who loved her. Happy siblings. A grandmother who baked cookies and told stories. What if the truth destroyed those memories? What if they had left because of something she had done? What if they were dead? Late at night, fueled by cold coffee and insomnia, Sarah would sometimes hear her mother's voice in her head. "You can do this, sweetheart. You're stronger than you know." But was she? Strong enough to face whatever truth was waiting? Her trust issues had become legendary. She had pushed away every romantic relationship, every close friendship. Getting close to people meant they could leave. And everyone left eventually, didn't they? That's what she had learned on that October day in 2001. The memorial service held by the town 5 years after the disappearance had felt like a betrayal. They weren't dead. Sarah refused to believe it. She had stood in the back of the church, watching neighbors cry for her perfect family, and wanted to scream. These people knew nothing. They saw the surface, the successful accountant, the cheerful housewife, the well-behaved children. But what had been happening underneath? Sarah had tried to tell the police about the little things she remembered. How her father would sometimes stare out the window for hours. How her mother's smile never quite reached her eyes. How there had been whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. But the police had written it off as normal family dynamics. Nothing suspicious. Just a family that had somehow, impossibly, disappeared. Then came the call that changed everything. September 2016. A detective's voice on the phone. "Ms. Mitchell, we've obtained permission to investigate the property on Maple Street. The new owners found something during renovations. We think you should be here." The house on Maple Street looked different. Smaller somehow, though Sarah knew that was impossible. The new owners had painted it a cheerful yellow, replacing the tired white of her childhood. The garden her mother had tended was now paved over for parking. Time had moved on, even if Sarah hadn't. Detective Rodriguez met her at the door. He was younger than she expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes that had seen too much. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult." Difficult didn't begin to cover it. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might burst through her chest. Her hands were sweating. She wiped them on her jeans and followed the detective inside. The living room looked nothing like she remembered. New furniture, different paint, strange family photos on walls where her own family's pictures had once hung. It was like walking through a ghost of her past, familiar and foreign at the same time. "It's in here," Rodriguez said, leading her to the fireplace. The same brick fireplace where Christmas stockings had hung, where her father had built fires on winter evenings, where she had roasted marshmallows with her siblings. But now the mantel had been pulled away from the wall. Behind it was a door, a small door, maybe 4 feet high, the kind you'd have to duck to enter. It was painted the same color as the wall, almost invisible unless you knew it was there. "The contractors found it yesterday," Rodriguez explained. "It's been sealed for years, painted over multiple times. Someone really didn't want it found." Sarah stared at the door. Her mouth was dry. "What's inside?" "I think you should see for yourself." Rodriguez opened the door. The smell hit her first. Old paper, cedar, dust. The smell of secrets kept too long. She had to crouch to fit through the doorway. And then she was inside a room she had never known existed. It wasn't large, maybe 8 by 10 feet. No windows. One bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, which Rodriguez switched on. And every wall was covered. Maps, newspaper clippings, photographs, handwritten journals stacked on a small desk, filing boxes labeled with dates. It was like stepping into someone's obsession, their secret life hidden behind family dinners and school pickups. Sarah's legs felt weak. She recognized her father's handwriting on some of the journals, her mother's neat printing on labels. This room had been their secret, their hidden world, and she had never known. For years, while she had been doing homework upstairs, sleeping in her bedroom, eating breakfast in the kitchen, this room had been here, right here, full of secrets. "What were they planning?" Sarah whispered. Rodriguez handed her a journal. The first one, dated 3 years before the disappearance. "I think," he said quietly, "they were planning to leave." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the journal. Her mother's handwriting filled the first page, dated September 1998. 3 years before they vanished. 3 years of planning that Sarah had known nothing about. "I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending," the entry began. "Every morning I wake up and put on my happy face. I smile at the neighbors. I volunteer at the school bake sale. I tell everyone how blessed we are. But inside I'm drowning." Sarah had to sit down. She found a folding chair in the corner, covered in dust, and collapsed into it. This wasn't her mother's voice. Or rather, it was. But it was a version of her mother she had never known. Raw. Honest. In pain. The journal entry continued. Her mother wrote about the pressure of maintaining their image in the tight-knit New England community. How exhausting it was to always be on, always performing the role of the perfect suburban housewife. She wrote about her husband's business troubles, how they were drowning in debt despite living in a nice house and driving nice cars, how terrified they were that someone would find out the truth. "Everyone thinks we have it all together," her mother had written. "But we're falling apart. The credit cards are maxed out. David's accounting firm is barely staying afloat. We smile and wave and host dinner parties we can't afford. I'm so tired of the pretending." Sarah felt tears running down her cheeks. She had never known. How had she never known? Rodriguez stood quietly near the door, giving her space. He had seen this before, she realized. Families with secrets, lives that looked perfect on the surface, but were crumbling underneath. She flipped through more pages, entry after entry of her mother's private thoughts. The depression she hid, the anxiety that kept her awake at night, the feeling of being trapped in a life that looked good but felt suffocating. And then, on a page dated November 1998, a name appeared that changed everything. "Margaret wrote to me today," the entry said. "After all these years, she's living in a community now, somewhere remote and beautiful. She says they've found peace there. Real peace, not the fake kind we perform for everyone else. She invited us to visit. I don't know if I should tell David." Margaret. Sarah tried to remember if she had ever heard that name. Was Margaret a friend? A relative? Why had this person reached out after years of silence? And what was this community? But what really chilled Sarah to the bone was the next sentence. "Margaret says the community welcomes families. But she warned me, if we choose to join them, we have to leave everything behind. No contact with the outside world. It's the price of true freedom." Had her family joined some kind of cult? Was that what happened? Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, each one more frightening than the last. Over the next several weeks, Sarah threw herself into investigating the hidden room's contents. She took a leave of absence from work, telling her editor she needed time for a family matter. He didn't ask questions. Everyone at the paper knew about her family's disappearance. She rented a storage unit and carefully transported everything from the hidden room. Detective Rodriguez had agreed to let her keep copies of the documents while the police continued their own investigation. Sarah couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every waking moment was spent poring over her parents' secret plans. The financial records were particularly revealing. Her father had been keeping 2 sets of books, the official ones that showed a struggling but respectable accounting business, and the private ones that showed the truth. They were hemorrhaging money. Bad investments, loans they couldn't repay, bills piling up faster than income. But then, starting in early 1999, something changed. Small amounts of money began appearing in a separate account. Cash deposits, never large enough to trigger bank reporting requirements. $200 here, $500 there. Her parents were selling things, quietly, methodically, converting everything to cash. Sarah found a list in her father's handwriting. Antiques sold at estate sales in other towns, jewelry pawned under fake names, stocks liquidated, her mother's grandmother's silver service, her father's vintage record collection. Piece by piece, they had been dismantling their material life, turning everything into money that couldn't be traced. She also found evidence they had been practicing. Weekend trips labeled as family camping in her mother's calendar were actually dry runs for living off the grid. There were notes about water purification, food preservation, basic survival skills. Her father had been teaching himself carpentry. Her mother had been learning about medicinal plants and sustainable farming. How had Sarah missed all of this? She remembered those camping trips. Her siblings had been excited, but she had usually stayed home, claiming she had too much homework or plans with friends. She had been too wrapped up in her own teenage life to notice her family was preparing to disappear. The most painful discovery came in a folder labeled Legal. Her parents had been researching how to vanish legally, how to abandon assets without raising suspicion, how to disappear without it being considered fraud. They had been meticulous, careful, planning every detail. But one question haunted Sarah: why rush? The timeline showed months, maybe years, of careful preparation. But something had made them leave suddenly in October 2001. The breakfast on the table suggested they hadn't planned to leave that specific morning. Something had forced their hand. What happened that day? What made them finally run? It was week 6 of her investigation when Sarah found the box. A small wooden box, the kind her father used to use for storing important documents. It had been tucked behind a loose board at the back of the hidden room's only closet. Sarah almost missed it. Inside the box was a false bottom, and beneath that false bottom was an envelope. Her name was written on the front, in her mother's handwriting. For Sarah, to be sent when she's ready. But it had never been sent. For 15 years, this letter had waited in its hiding place while Sarah had suffered, wondered, and slowly built walls around her heart to keep out the pain. Her hands shook so badly she could barely open the envelope. She sat on the floor of her storage unit, surrounded by boxes of her family's secrets, and began to read. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then you've found our secret. I don't know how much time has passed. I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive us. But you deserve to know the truth." The letter was 10 pages long. Her mother explained everything: the financial problems, the crushing pressure of maintaining appearances, the judgment from neighbors, the competition among other parents, the constant feeling of never being enough. The community Margaret had told them about, where families could live simply, authentically, without the suffocating expectations of modern suburban life. But the most painful part came near the end. "We made the hardest decision of our lives, Sarah. We decided not to tell you. You were 19, about to start your adult life. You had just met that boy from your sociology class, the one that made you smile in a way we'd never seen before. You were declaring your journalism major. You were building your own future, separate from us. We saw your independence growing, and we were so proud." Sarah's tears fell onto the pages, smudging the ink. That boy. She remembered him now. Michael. They had dated for 3 months before her family disappeared. She had broken up with him a week after they vanished, unable to handle any emotional connection while her world was falling apart. "We were afraid," her mother wrote. "Afraid you would try to stop us. Or worse, that you would feel obligated to come with us and sacrifice the life you were building. Your father and I talked about it for months. We decided that leaving you behind was the kindest thing we could do. You were already on your own path. The kids were younger, still dependent on us. But you, our beautiful, capable daughter, you didn't need us anymore. Or so we told ourselves," the letter continued. "We thought we were protecting you. We thought we were setting you free. We didn't realize we were condemning you to a lifetime of questions. I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry we chose wrong. I'm so sorry we thought we were being brave when we were really just being cowards." Her mother ended the letter with instructions. If Sarah ever wanted to find them, there were clues in the room, coded references in the journals, a map with certain locations marked. But her mother begged her not to search unless she was sure it was what she wanted. "Sometimes," her mother wrote, "not knowing is easier than knowing." But that was where her mother was wrong. Sarah had spent 15 years in agony because of not knowing. And now that she had answers, the pain was different. But it was also the beginning of something else. Understanding. And with understanding came a new determination. She was going to find them, not to punish them, but to ask one question. Why didn't they trust that she would have understood? Sarah met James in month 7 of her investigation, though "met" wasn't quite accurate. She had known James for 3 years. He was a hospital administrator, calm and organized, the kind of man who made lists and kept schedules. They had started dating 2 years earlier, and 6 months ago he had proposed. The engagement ring sat in its box now, returned. The relationship had become another casualty of the hidden room's revelations. "I don't understand," James had said the night he issued his ultimatum. They were sitting in Sarah's apartment, surrounded by boxes of documents she had brought home from the storage unit. "Your family chose to leave, Sarah. They made their choice 15 years ago. Why can't you just accept that and move on?" But Sarah couldn't make him understand. For him, the situation was simple. Her family had abandoned her, and she should let them go. For her, it was infinitely more complex. They hadn't abandoned her out of cruelty. They had left because they were drowning and saw no other way out. And they had excluded her because they thought they were protecting her future. "I need to know they're safe," Sarah had tried to explain. "I need to know they're okay. I need to ask them why they didn't think I could handle the truth." "And then what?" James asked. "You find them, you ask your questions, and then you can finally live your life?" "Sarah, you've been putting your life on hold for 15 years. I love you, but I can't watch you do this anymore. I can't build a future with someone who's trapped in the past." The ultimatum was clear. Let go of the investigation, or let go of him. Sarah chose the investigation. She watched him pack his belongings with the same meticulous care her father had once used to organize his tools. Every item carefully wrapped, every box neatly labeled. James was nothing if not thorough. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said at the door, his suitcase in hand. "I really do, but I don't think you'll find peace out there. I think peace is something you have to find inside yourself first." Maybe he was right, but Sarah couldn't stop now. She was too close. The clues in her mother's letter had led her to specific journal entries. Her father's maps had markings that corresponded to locations he had researched. The investigation was revealing a trail, and Sarah had to follow it to the end. Her friends at work noticed the change. Sarah became even more withdrawn, more obsessed. She stopped going to lunch with colleagues. She worked late every night, but not on assigned stories. She was chasing ghosts, they whispered. She needed help, they worried. But Sarah didn't need help. She needed answers. And in month 8, she finally caught a break. A former colleague of her father's agreed to meet with her. He had always seemed uncomfortable at the memorial service years ago, avoiding eye contact, leaving early. Sarah had tracked him down through old business records. His name was Robert Chen, and he had worked at her father's accounting firm for 5 years before it closed. They met at a coffee shop in a town neither of them lived in, neutral territory. Robert looked older than she remembered, gray at the temples, lines around his eyes. "Your father asked me strange questions," Robert said after Sarah explained why she wanted to talk. "About a year before they disappeared. Questions about starting over, about what would happen if someone just walked away from their debts, their business, their whole life." "What did you tell him?" Sarah asked, her notebook out, journalist instincts taking over. "I told him it was crazy talk. Midlife crisis stuff. I laughed it off." Robert stared into his coffee cup. "I should have paid more attention." Robert Chen's information led Sarah to her next step: hiring a private investigator. Not just any investigator, but someone who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. Her name was Diana Reeves, 63 years old, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen everything. She worked out of a small office above a dry cleaner in a city 2 hours from Maple Street. The office was cluttered but organized, walls covered with maps and filing cabinets labeled with years instead of names. "I don't do missing persons for everyone," Diana said bluntly when Sarah arrived for their first meeting. "Most people don't really want to find their missing loved ones. They want closure, sure, but finding someone who chose to disappear, that often causes more pain than it solves." "I need to find them," Sarah said. "Not to punish them, not even to bring them back. I just need to know they're okay. And I need them to know that I would have understood, that they didn't have to protect me from their choice." Something in Sarah's voice must have convinced Diana. The older woman nodded slowly. "Sit down. Show me what you have." Over the next 3 hours, Sarah laid out everything: the journals, the financial records, the letter from her mother, the clues and coded references. Diana listened, took notes, asked sharp questions that revealed decades of experience. "You're dealing with a planned disappearance," Diana said finally. "Not a kidnapping, not murder, not anything criminal. Your family made a choice, a difficult choice, but a choice nonetheless. That actually makes them easier to find in some ways. They're not running from the law, so they're not as paranoid. They're running toward something." "This community," Sarah said, "the one Margaret mentioned. How do we find it?" Diana pulled out a laptop that looked ancient but clearly worked fine. "Communities like this leave traces, people who disappear together, patterns of behavior, supply chains for off-grid living. I've been tracking alternative communities for 20 years, ever since my own daughter chose to disappear into one." Sarah sat up straighter. "Your daughter?" 23 years ago, Diana said, her voice carefully neutral. "She joined a commune in Oregon, told me she was suffocating in the modern world, needed to find herself. She was 19. I spent 5 years looking for her before she finally sent me a letter saying she was happy and asking me to stop searching." "Did you stop?" Diana met Sarah's eyes. "Eventually, because I realized I was searching for my own peace, not hers. She had already found hers. That's why I do this work now. I help other parents, other families, find the closure I eventually found. Sometimes closure means finding the person. Sometimes it means understanding why they left." Over the next weeks, Diana became not just Sarah's investigator but something like a mentor, even a surrogate mother figure. She taught Sarah that finding people was only half the battle. Understanding why they left was the other half, and accepting their choice, even when it hurt, was the final and hardest step. Together, they uncovered a pattern. Several families from similar backgrounds had quietly disappeared over the past 2 decades, all outwardly successful but privately struggling, all with connections to the same online forums about alternative living, about escape from society's pressures, about finding authenticity in simplicity. "Your family isn't alone," Diana said in month 10. "There's a movement happening. People who look successful on paper but feel empty inside. They're opting out, not into cults, not into anything dangerous, just into different ways of living. So where are they? Sarah asked. Where do people go when they opt out of modern life? Diana spread a map across her desk. 3 locations were marked with red circles. Based on everything we've found, I think your family is in one of these 3 places. The first location was in northern Washington state, near the Canadian border. Diana had identified a community there that matched the description in Sarah's mother's journals. Remote, self-sustaining, focused on simple living and environmental harmony. But getting there meant flying. And Sarah hadn't been on a plane since before her family disappeared. I can't, Sarah said, staring at the plane tickets Diana had purchased. They were sitting in Sarah's apartment, planning the first trip. I physically cannot get on a plane. When did the fear start? Diana asked gently. After they left. After I realized that everyone I loved could just vanish in an instant. Flying felt like asking for disaster. Like tempting fate. Diana nodded. It's not really about flying, is it? It's about control. In a car, you feel like you have some control. On a plane, you're completely helpless. Just like you were helpless to stop your family from leaving. Sarah knew Diana was right. The fear of flying was just one symptom of a larger terror. That everyone she loved would eventually leave her. That attachment meant pain. That trust meant betrayal. But if she wanted answers, she had to face this fear. She had to get on that plane. The flight to Washington was a nightmare. Sarah gripped the armrest so hard her knuckles turned white. Diana sat beside her, calm and patient, talking her through every bump of turbulence. "Biderd, breathe," she kept saying. "Just breathe. You're not in control, and that's okay. Sometimes we have to trust that we'll land safely even when we can't steer the plane." The community in Washington was beautiful. Nestled in a valley, surrounded by mountains, it looked like something from a postcard. Simple wooden houses, gardens overflowing with vegetables, solar panels glinting in the sun. Children played in a central courtyard while adults worked together on various projects. But Sarah's family wasn't there. The community's leader, a kind woman in her 50s named Ruth, listened to Sarah's story with compassion. "I understand what you're looking for," Ruth said. "And I'm sorry, but no family matching that description has ever lived here. However, I've heard of other communities. There are several along the West Coast, and more internationally." It was disappointing, but not devastating. Diana had warned Sarah that finding her family might take time. "This is a process," Diana had said. "Each place we cross off the list gets us closer to where they actually are." The second location was in New Mexico, a desert community that focused on sustainable architecture and alternative education. The plane ride there was slightly easier, though Sarah still felt her anxiety spike during takeoff. Again, her family wasn't there, but the community members were helpful, sharing information about other similar groups. A pattern was emerging. These communities were networked, aware of each other, sometimes sharing resources and information. The alternative living movement was larger and more organized than Sarah had realized. "People think we're dropping out," one woman told Sarah over dinner. "But we're not dropping out. We're choosing differently. We're saying that success doesn't have to mean money and status. It can mean peace and authenticity instead." Sarah was beginning to understand. Her family hadn't run away from her. They had run toward something, a different kind of life, a different definition of happiness. But understanding didn't ease the pain of being left behind. It just made it more complicated. The third location required the most difficult journey yet. It was accessible only by train, then boat, then a challenging hike through dense forest. Diana, despite her age, was in better shape than Sarah. Years of tracking people through difficult terrain had kept her fit. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Diana asked as they boarded the train in month 13. "We could hire a local guide. You don't have to make this journey yourself." But Sarah did have to. She needed to understand what her family had chosen. She needed to experience the difficulty of reaching this place, to comprehend the commitment it represented. The train took them to a coastal town so small it barely appeared on maps. The boat was piloted by a weathered man who asked no questions, just took their money and transported them across water so cold and gray it looked like liquid stone. And then came the hike. 8 miles through forest so dense the sunlight barely penetrated. Sarah fell twice, bruising her ribs and her ego. Her legs ached. Her lungs burned. Every step was a battle against her body's desire to turn back. Diana, hiking ahead, didn't slow down or offer sympathy. "Your family made this journey," she called back. "Your grandmother made this journey. If they could do it, so can you." At mile 5, Sarah wanted to quit. At mile 6, she was crying from exhaustion and pain. At mile 7, something shifted. She stopped thinking about her aching muscles and started thinking about her family making this same journey. Her mother, who had never been particularly athletic. Her grandmother, elderly even 15 years ago. They had done this. They had wanted this new life badly enough to endure this. They stopped for the night in a village at the base of the mountains. The locals spoke little English, but they were kind, offering food and shelter. An old woman made tea for Sarah's bruised ribs, applying a salve that smelled of herbs and earth. "You seek the disappeared ones?" the woman asked in halting English. Sarah's heart raced. "You know about them? They live beyond the mountains. People who want peace, not running from something, but running toward different way of being." The woman studied Sarah's face. "You have her eyes." The woman who came with 2 children and old mother. "You are family, yes?" Sarah could barely breathe. "Yes, I'm their daughter. I'm looking for them." The old woman nodded slowly. "They are happy there, at peace. First time in long time, maybe. You go to them, but you prepare heart. They are not same people who left. None of us are same after we find peace." That night, Sarah barely slept. She was close. After 15 years of questions, 15 years of pain, she was finally close to answers. But the old woman's words haunted her. What if her family didn't want to be found? What if seeing her would shatter their peace? Diana found Sarah sitting outside at dawn, watching the sun rise over the mountains they would cross that day. "Second thoughts?" Diana asked. "A million thoughts," Sarah admitted. "What if they don't want to see me? What if I've built this whole thing up in my head, and the reality destroys me?" Diana sat beside her. "You'll survive it. Whatever happens, you'll survive it. Because you've already survived 15 years of not knowing, and that was harder than any truth could ever be." The market was small, just a wooden structure with a thatched roof, where local farmers sold vegetables and handmade goods. Sarah and Diana had arrived that morning, planning to ask vendors if they knew of the community beyond the mountains. And then Sarah saw her sister, Emma. No longer the 8-year-old girl Sarah remembered, but a grown woman of 23, tanned and healthy, her hair in a long braid down her back. She was buying supplies, laughing at something the vendor said. Time stopped. Sarah's vision narrowed, until all she could see was her sister, the little girl who used to follow her around, who had begged Sarah to play dolls when Sarah was too cool for dolls, who had been eating toast that October morning, who had left her favorite doll on the couch. "Emma," Sarah breathed. Emma turned. Their eyes met, and in that instant, recognition flashed across Emma's face, followed by shock, then fear, then something like joy mixed with terror. "Sarah?" Emma's shopping bag dropped from her hands, vegetables rolling across the ground. Then they were running toward each other, and Sarah was hugging her sister, and both of them were crying, and nothing else existed except this moment, this impossible reunion. "You're alive," Sarah sobbed. "You're okay. You're here." "How did you find us?" Emma asked, pulling back to look at Sarah's face. "How did you—" "We thought you didn't want to be found. We sent letters." "What letters?" "I never got any letters." They stood there in the market, blocking traffic, both talking at once, trying to fit 15 years of separation into a few minutes of rushed explanations. Finally, a vendor gently suggested they move to a quieter location. Emma led Sarah to a small cafe at the edge of the market. Diana followed at a discreet distance, giving the sisters space. Over tea, the story came out. The letters Emma's family had sent to Sarah's college address during that first year. How they had been returned as undeliverable. How they had thought Sarah had received them and chosen not to respond. "We thought you hated us," Emma said, tears running down her cheeks. "We thought you were so angry that you wanted nothing to do with us." Mom cried for months. Dad barely spoke. They thought excluding you from our plan had made you hate them. Sarah felt like she was drowning. A clerical error. A simple mistake in the university's forwarding system when she had changed dorms. That's all it had taken to create 15 years of mutual pain. Her family had thought she was rejecting them. She had thought they had abandoned her without explanation. "I need to see them," Sarah said. "Emma, I need to see Mom and Dad. I need them to know I never got those letters. I need them to know I've been looking for them all this time." Emma hesitated. "It's not that simple, Sarah. They've built a life here. We all have, coming back to that world even for a visit. It's painful. It reminds them of everything they escaped from." "I'm not asking them to come back," Sarah said. "I just need to see them, please." Emma studied her sister's face for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'll need to talk to them first. Prepare them. This is going to be a shock." "I've waited 15 years," Sarah said. "I can wait a few more days." The reunion, when it finally happened a week later, was nothing like Sarah had imagined. She had pictured tears, apologies, dramatic declarations. Instead, it was quiet, almost ordinary, as if 15 years hadn't passed, as if her family hadn't vanished without goodbye. Her mother opened the door of their simple wooden house. She looked older, of course, gray in her hair, lines around her eyes. But she also looked lighter somehow, less burdened. "Sarah," she said softly. And then, "My girl, my beautiful girl." They embraced in the doorway, and Sarah felt her mother's tears soaking into her shoulder. Her father appeared behind her mother, and he was crying too, something Sarah had never seen in her childhood. Her brother, now 21, hung back shyly, probably barely remembering her. Her grandmother sat in a rocking chair by the window, frailer than Sarah remembered, but smiling in a way that seemed to come from deep inside. "I knew you'd find us," her grandmother said. "You always were the stubborn one." The house was small but comfortable. One main room with a kitchen area, 2 bedrooms, a loft where Emma and Sarah's brother slept. Solar panels provided electricity. A wood stove kept them warm. Water came from a well they shared with neighboring houses. It was simple, rustic, and her family seemed genuinely happy. Over dinner that first night, vegetables they had grown themselves, bread her mother had baked, fish from the local river. Her father explained their journey. "We were drowning, Sarah. Every day was an act, a performance. We smiled for the neighbors and died a little inside." Her mother continued the story. "Margaret's invitation felt like a life raft, a way to survive. But we made terrible mistakes. We should have told you. We should have trusted you to understand." "We tried to include you," her father said, pulling out a box from under his bed. "These are copies of the letters we sent. The ones that came back." Sarah looked through them, her hands shaking. Letter after letter, explaining their choice, begging for her understanding, asking her to visit if she ever wanted. All returned as undeliverable. "The university said I moved dorms," Sarah explained. "There was a mix-up in the forwarding system. I never got them. I thought—" Her voice broke. "I thought you left without saying goodbye. I thought you didn't want me." The pain on her parents' faces was real and raw. "All these years," her mother whispered. "All these years we thought you knew. We thought you chose to cut us out of your life. We tried to respect your decision." "I've been looking for you for 15 years, Sarah said. "Every day. Every investigation I did as a journalist was practice for finding you." They cried together then, her family surrounding her, everyone grieving for the years lost to a simple error, a stupid mistake that had cost them all so much. Sarah stayed for 3 months. She had taken an extended leave from work, telling her editor she needed time to process family matters. He hadn't asked questions. Living in the community was both harder and easier than she expected. The physical work was exhausting. She helped in the gardens, learned to preserve food, carried water, chopped wood. Her muscles ached constantly. Her hands developed calluses. She had never been so tired in her life. But there was something peaceful about it, too. No constant connectivity. No emails demanding immediate responses. No news cycle creating endless anxiety. Life moved with the rhythm of seasons, of sunrise and sunset, of planting and harvest. She got to know her siblings as the adults they had become. Emma was studying herbal medicine with an elder in the community. She wanted to be a healer, she said. Their brother Jack was learning carpentry from their father. He was quiet, but skilled with his hands, creating beautiful furniture from local wood. Her grandmother spent her days in the rocking chair, sometimes lucid and sharp, other times lost in memories. But even in her confusion, she seemed content. "This is a good place to grow old," she told Sarah one afternoon. "Better than that hospital they wanted to put me in." Sarah learned about the community's structure. 20 families, about 80 people total. They made decisions collectively. They shared resources. Everyone contributed according to their abilities. They weren't rejecting civilization, Sarah realized. They were choosing a different kind of civilization, one based on cooperation rather than competition, on sufficiency rather than excess. But as the weeks passed, Sarah felt the pull of her old life. She missed her work, her colleagues, the feeling of chasing a story. She missed coffee shops and bookstores, museums and movies. She missed the pulse of current events, the feeling of being connected to the larger world. She was proud of what her family had built here. She understood why they had made this choice. But it wasn't her choice. She had built a different life, and despite its problems, despite the loneliness and the trust issues and the obsessive work habits, it was her life. One evening, sitting with her mother on the porch, Sarah voiced her thoughts. "I don't think I can stay. I thought maybe I could. But this isn't my world. My world is out there with all its noise and chaos." Her mother smiled sadly. "I know. I think I've always known. You were born to tell stories, Sarah. To document things. To chase truth. You can't do that here. Does that disappoint you?" "No," her mother said firmly. "It makes me proud. We made our choice. You're making yours. That's how it should be." But Sarah's grandmother, listening from her chair, added something that changed everything. The community isn't just about escaping modern life. It's about healing from it. Every family here carries wounds. Wounds that society's pace and pressure inflicted. We're not running away. We're running toward healing. On her last night in the community, Sarah sat with her father by the fire pit where families gathered each evening. The stars above were brighter than she had ever seen, unpolluted by city lights. "I'm going back," Sarah said. "But I don't want to lose you again." Her father nodded. "We've been talking about that. The community allows occasional contact with the outside world. Letters, delivered through the village postal system. It's slow, but it works." "Letters," Sarah said. "Just like the old days." "The community isn't a prison," her father explained. "We can have connections. We just choose to have them slowly, deliberately. No instant responses. No constant availability. Just thoughtful words sent across distance. And visits? Once a year, maybe. If you want to come back. If you can handle the journey." Sarah thought about the plane rides, the boat, the hike through the forest. "I can handle it. I've already proved that." Her mother joined them at the fire. "We need to ask you something, Sarah. A favor. Anything. Don't publish our story. Don't tell the world where we are. We trust you as our daughter, but we're asking you, as a journalist, to keep our secret." Sarah had been expecting this. She had already decided, but hearing them ask made it real. "I won't publish it. This is your story to tell or not tell. I'll honor that. But you can use what you learned," her grandmother said from nearby, her voice surprisingly strong. "Write about the pressures people face, about families drowning beneath surfaces of success, about the growing number of people seeking different ways of living. Just don't tell them about us specifically. That's exactly what Sarah decided to do. She would channel her experience into journalism that mattered, that helped people understand the hidden struggles so many families faced. She would give voice to the silent suffering that drove people to desperate choices. Before she left, her family gathered for a final meal. They laughed and cried and made promises to write. Emma gave Sarah a carefully wrapped package. Herbs for healing, she said. Jack gave her a small wooden box he had made. Perfectly fitted joints, sanded smooth. Her grandmother gave her the journal she had been keeping, filled with stories from her life, things Sarah had never known. Her parents gave her the most important gift: forgiveness. For being angry, for not understanding, for the 15 years of separation that neither of them had really chosen. "We all made mistakes," her father said. "We thought we were protecting you. You thought we were abandoning you. Neither was true." The journey back was long but felt shorter somehow. Sarah had answers now. Not perfect answers, not the fairy tale reunion she might have once imagined, but real answers, complex and bittersweet, and ultimately healing. Diana met her at the airport, took one look at her face, and knew. "You found them." "I found them. They're alive and happy and safe." "And you?" Sarah considered the question. Was she happy? Was she at peace? Not entirely. She had lost 15 years with her family, and nothing could give those back. But she understood now. She understood their choice. She understood her own path. And that understanding, while painful, was also liberating. "I'm going to be okay," Sarah said. "For the first time in 15 years, I think I'm actually going to be okay." She returned to her work, transformed. Her articles on family pressure, on the suffocating expectations of success, on alternative communities and the people who chose them, won awards. Readers wrote to her, sharing their own struggles, thanking her for giving voice to their hidden pain. She started dating again, carefully, slowly. She met someone eventually, a librarian who understood that her relationship with her family was complicated and accepted it without needing all the details. Someone who knew that independence and loyalty weren't opposites, that you could be fiercely self-reliant and still love deeply. The letters from her family arrived monthly. Her mother's handwriting, Emma's updates on her herbal studies, Jack's descriptions of furniture projects, her grandmother's rambling stories. Each letter was treasured, read multiple times, kept in the wooden box Jack had made. Once a year, Sarah made the journey. Plane, boat, hike. Each time a little easier, each visit precious and brief. Her family remained in their community, building their quiet life. She remained in hers, telling stories, chasing truth, living in the noisy world they had escaped. The hidden room on Maple Street was sealed again, its secrets catalogued and stored by the police, then returned to Sarah. She kept one item, her mother's first journal entry, the one about dreaming of a different life. She framed it and hung it in her apartment, a reminder that people are rarely who we think they are. That sometimes love means letting go of the stories we tell ourselves about those we've lost. And that sometimes the most profound mysteries aren't solved with dramatic revelations, but with quiet understanding. With acceptance of choices we might not make ourselves. With forgiveness for wounds inflicted by accident rather than malice. Sarah never forgot that October morning in 2001, the day her world shattered. But now she understood it differently. Her family hadn't vanished. They had transformed. And in seeking them, in refusing to let the mystery remain unsolved, she had transformed too. From the abandoned daughter, frozen in grief, to a woman who understood that sometimes people leave not because they don't love you, but because they love themselves enough to choose survival. The vanishing on Maple Street became, in the end, not a story of loss, but a story of multiple paths to healing. Her family found theirs in simplicity and distance. Sarah found hers in persistence and truth. And the hidden door behind the fireplace, which had seemed like such a betrayal, revealed itself to be exactly what it was. Not a secret kept from Sarah, but a bridge between two worlds, waiting to be discovered when she was finally ready to cross it. 3 years after finding her family, Sarah Mitchell's life had settled into a rhythm she never expected. Her apartment was different now, still organized, but the obsessive evidence boards were gone. The boxes of documents had been donated to a research library studying alternative communities. In their place were bookshelves, plants, photos from her annual visits to her family. But the story of the vanishing on Maple Street wasn't over. Not really, because stories like this never truly end. They just transform into new chapters, new questions, new revelations. It started with an email. A woman named Patricia from Ohio had read one of Sarah's articles about families struggling beneath surfaces of success. "Your words describe my life exactly," Patricia wrote. "Quote, I'm drowning in a beautiful house with a successful husband and perfect children. Nobody knows I cry myself to sleep every night. Nobody knows we're one emergency away from bankruptcy. How did you know? How did you understand?" Sarah stared at that email for a long time. She couldn't tell Patricia the truth, that she had lived it through her own family's story. But she could help. She wrote back, offering resources, suggesting counseling, sharing strategies for honest communication with loved ones. Patricia's email wasn't alone. Dozens came, then hundreds. People reaching out, sharing their secret struggles, thanking Sarah for making them feel less alone. Some were drowning in debt while maintaining appearances. Others were suffocating under the pressure of constant performance, of being on for neighbors and colleagues while falling apart inside. Sarah's editor noticed the response. "These articles are resonating with people in ways I've never seen," he said during a meeting. "Seppi, whatever you're tapping into, it's powerful. It's real." But with the attention came danger. Other journalists started digging into Sarah's past. They knew about her family's disappearance. They wanted to know if there was a connection between her investigative work and her personal history. Was she writing from experience? Had she found her family? Sarah had to be careful. She had promised her family privacy, and she intended to keep that promise. When reporters asked about her family, she gave the same answer. "They disappeared 15 years ago. I've made peace with not having all the answers. Sometimes that's the only closure we get." It wasn't entirely a lie. She did have peace, just not the kind people assumed. And she didn't have all the answers. She would never know what might have happened if that clerical error hadn't occurred. If those letters had reached her. If she had been included in her family's original decision. One reader's response changed everything. A woman named Helen from Vermont wrote not asking for help, but offering information. "I knew a family that disappeared," Helen wrote. 20 years ago. The Prescotts. They lived next door to me. One day they were there, the next they were gone. Reading your articles made me wonder if they made the same choice your articles describe. Escaping the pressure. Finding peace somewhere else. Sarah's journalist instincts kicked in. She contacted Helen, learned about the Prescott family. Successful lawyer father, accomplished teacher mother. 3 children who excelled at everything. And then, one spring morning in 2002, they were simply gone. The pattern was identical to her own family's disappearance. And if there were 2 families, might there be more? Sarah began researching, carefully and quietly. She found 7 other cases over the past 25 years. Families that fit the profile. Outwardly successful, privately struggling, disappearing without trace or explanation. All from similar communities. Suburban, middle to upper middle class, places where appearances mattered more than authenticity. Were they all in communities like her family's? Had they all found peace? Or had something darker happened to some of them? Sarah realized she was standing at a crossroads. She could investigate this pattern, potentially write the biggest story of her career. Or she could protect her family's secret, respect the choices these families had made, and let sleeping mysteries lie. What would you do? Would you chase the truth, even if it meant exposing people who had chosen to disappear? Sarah spent weeks wrestling with her conscience. On one side was the journalist in her, the part that needed to tell stories, to uncover truth, to give voice to hidden realities. On the other side was the daughter who had promised her family privacy, who understood intimately why people might choose to vanish. She scheduled a meeting with Diana Reeves, the private investigator who had become her mentor and friend. They met at their usual coffee shop, the one where they had first discussed searching for Sarah's family years ago. "I need your advice," Sarah said, laying out the pattern she had discovered. 7 families, maybe more. All similar circumstances, all disappeared. What do I do with this information? Diana sipped her coffee slowly, considering. What do you want to do? I want to find them. I want to know if they're safe and happy like my family, or if something terrible happened. I want to tell their stories. But I promised my family I wouldn't expose them. You can investigate without exposing your family specifically, Diana pointed out. You can write about the pattern without revealing locations or identifying details. The question is, should you? That was the real question. Not could she, but should she? These families had chosen to disappear. They had made difficult decisions to protect their mental health, their peace, their survival. Did Sarah have the right to drag them back into the spotlight, even anonymously? There's another consideration, Diana added. What if some of these families aren't safe? What if some of them didn't choose to disappear but were forced? You might be the only person asking these questions. Sarah hadn't thought of that. Her family's story had ended happily, but that didn't mean every disappearance had the same outcome. What if one of these families was in danger? What if her investigation could help someone? She made a decision. She would investigate, but carefully. She would prioritize the safety and privacy of the families while still trying to understand the pattern. If she discovered that any family was in danger, she would act. If they were all like her family, safe and content in their chosen lives, she would write about the phenomenon without exposing anyone. The investigation took 6 months. Sarah worked with Diana, tracking down information, interviewing people who had known the disappeared families. They discovered something unexpected. 4 of the 7 families had ended up in the same network of communities her family belonged to. They were safe, healthy, and had no desire to return to their old lives. But 3 families remained mysteries. Sarah and Diana found no trace of them in any alternative community. No letters sent. No reported sightings. It was as if they had truly vanished. Not just disappeared into a different way of living, but ceased to exist entirely. For these 3 families, Sarah felt a responsibility to keep digging. She owed it to the children left behind, to the relatives still searching, to give them the same closure she had found. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former member of one of the communities contacted Sarah after reading her articles. His name was Marcus, and he had left the community after 10 years because he missed his mother, who was dying and whom he couldn't reach. There are good communities, Marcus told Sarah over the phone, like the one I was in. But there are also controlling ones, places that start with good intentions but become cults. Places where leaving isn't really an option anymore. Marcus had heard rumors about one such community, hidden deeper in the wilderness than most, a place where families went, but sometimes didn't leave, where the line between choosing simplicity and being controlled had blurred into something dangerous. I don't know if it's real, Marcus admitted. It might just be rumors meant to scare people. But if I were looking for missing families, that's where I'd start. Sarah felt ice in her veins. What if one of the 3 missing families had ended up there? What if they needed help but couldn't ask for it? She looked at Diana, who had been listening on speakerphone. The older woman's face was grim. We have to check it out, Diana said. Even if it's just a rumor. We have to know. The journey to the rumored community took Sarah and Diana to the most remote location yet, deep in the Alaskan wilderness, accessible only by bush plane, and then days of hiking through terrain that tested every limit Sarah thought she had. The pilot who flew them in was reluctant to share information. People who go looking for that place usually don't come back, he said. Not because something bad happens to them, but because they choose to stay, or because they get lost in the wilderness trying to find it. We're just looking, Sarah assured him. We're not planning to stay. The pilot gave her a look that suggested he'd heard that before. "I'll wait 3 days. If you're not back by then, I'm leaving without you. I've got a family to get home to." The hike was brutal. September in Alaska meant unpredictable weather, freezing nights, and terrain that shifted from dense forest to treacherous marshland to steep mountain passes. Diana, despite being in her 60s, moved with practiced efficiency. Sarah struggled to keep up, her city-softened body protesting every step. On the second day, they found signs of human presence. A cleared trail, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Blazes on trees that looked natural but formed a pattern. Diana pointed them out, her experienced eye catching what Sarah would have missed. "Someone maintains this path," Diana said. "The question is who and where does it lead?" They followed the trail for hours. The forest grew denser, darker. Sarah felt watched, though she saw no one. The sensation was eerie, unsettling. This didn't feel like her family's community, which had been welcoming and open. This felt secretive, dangerous. As dusk approached, they saw it. A settlement of buildings arranged in a perfect circle around a central structure. Smoke rose from chimneys. Gardens surrounded the buildings. It looked peaceful, almost idyllic, except for one detail that made Sarah's blood run cold. The entire settlement was surrounded by a fence. Not a decorative fence, but a serious barrier, 8 feet high, made of sharpened logs, with only one visible entrance. "That's not normal," Diana whispered. They were crouched behind trees at the forest's edge, observing. Communities don't need fences like that unless they're keeping people in or keeping people out. As they watched, a guard walked the perimeter. Armed with what looked like a hunting rifle, Sarah's heart pounded. This was nothing like her family's community. This was something else entirely. "We need to get closer," Sarah said. "We need to know if any of those missing families are in there." "Too dangerous," Diana argued. "We should go back, report this to authorities." "And tell them what? That we saw a fenced community in the wilderness? That's not illegal. People have the right to live how they want, even if it looks strange to us." Diana knew Sarah was right. Unless they had proof of something illegal, authorities wouldn't act. And by the time they could get authorities out here, if there was something wrong, it might be too late. They waited until full dark. Then, moving carefully, they approached the fence. The guard had moved to the far side of the perimeter. Sarah and Diana had maybe 10 minutes before he circled back. Up close, the fence was even more intimidating. But between 2 logs, Sarah could see into the compound. People moved between buildings. Children played in the central area, but something about their play seemed wrong. Too quiet, too controlled. Not the joyful chaos of the children in her family's community, but something more subdued, more fearful. And then Sarah saw her, a woman, maybe 40 years old, hanging laundry outside one of the buildings. Even in the dim light, Sarah recognized her from the photos she had studied. Michelle Prescott, one of the disappeared mothers. One of the 3 families Sarah and Diana had been unable to locate in any normal community. They had found her, but the question remained. Did Michelle Prescott want to be found? Or had she, like the others here, chosen this life? And if she wanted to leave, would they let her? Sarah and Diana retreated into the forest before the guard completed his circuit. They hiked back to their camp in silence, both processing what they had seen. "We have to do something," Sarah said once they were safely away. "Even if they chose this initially, that fence suggests they can't leave now." "That's not freedom. That's imprisonment." Diana nodded slowly. "Tomorrow we try to make contact. We find out if anyone wants help. And then we decide our next move." But tomorrow would bring revelations neither of them expected. Because the community surrounded by fences held secrets darker than simple isolation. And Sarah's investigation was about to uncover something that would force her to choose between her promise to her family and her responsibility to people who couldn't save themselves. What was happening behind that fence? And how far would Sarah go to uncover the truth? Morning came with a heavy fog that rolled through the Alaskan forest like a living thing. Sarah barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities and plans. Beside her, Diana was already awake, studying a rough map she had sketched of the compound's layout. "We need to be smart about this," Diana said quietly. "If this place is what I think it is, approaching the wrong way could get us killed. Or worse, could get the people inside punished for our attempt to contact them." Sarah understood. She had read about controlling communities, places that started with idealistic principles but twisted into something darker. Places where leaving meant betrayal, where questions meant punishment, where the leader's word was law, enforced with fear and isolation. They waited until mid-morning when the fog was thickest. The visibility would work in their favor, hiding them from the guard's sight. They approached from a different angle than the night before, moving slowly, stopping every few steps to listen. The sounds from inside the compound were clearer now. Children's voices reciting something in unison. Not playful chanting, but rote memorization. The kind of repetition that erased individual thought and replaced it with group doctrine. Sarah's stomach turned. They positioned themselves near a section of fence furthest from the guard tower. Diana had noticed the night before that this area had a small gap between buildings. A place where someone might come to hang laundry or dump water. A place where they might catch someone alone. They waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. Sarah's legs cramped from crouching. Her hands were numb from the cold. But she didn't move. Couldn't move. Not when they were this close. Then a door opened. A woman emerged carrying a bucket. Even through the fog, Sarah could see her face clearly now. Michelle Prescott. 20 years older than her missing person photo, but unmistakably her. Thin to the point of gauntness, moving with a careful, fearful precision that spoke of consequences for mistakes. Sarah made a decision. She moved closer to the fence, staying low. When Michelle was just feet away, Sarah whispered, "Michelle Prescott?" The woman froze. The bucket slipped from her hands, water splashing onto the ground. Her eyes darted toward the guard tower, terrified. "Please," Sarah whispered urgently. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm looking for families who disappeared. The Prescotts from Vermont. Is that you? Do you need help?" Michelle's face was a war between hope and terror. She glanced around frantically, then moved closer to the fence, pretending to pick up her bucket. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely audible. "You need to leave. Now. If they catch you here, they'll—" She stopped, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. "I can help you," Sarah insisted. "I can get you out. You and your family." "My family?" Michelle's laugh was bitter, broken. "My husband is dead. Tried to leave 2 years ago. They said it was an accident during a hunting trip. My children don't even remember Vermont. They've been taught that the outside world is evil, that I'm the evil one for wanting to leave." Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't a community. It was a prison. And Michelle Prescott was a prisoner who had watched her husband die for trying to escape. "How many families are here?" Sarah asked. "How many people want out?" "Maybe 20 adults, 30 children. But wanting out and being able to get out are different things. The leader, he calls himself Father Samuel, he has eyes everywhere. He knows everything. And anyone who tries to leave," Michelle's voice broke. "They don't make it far." Diana, listening from nearby, pulled out a small GPS device. "Mark your location tonight at midnight," she whispered to Michelle. "Put something visible in this spot. We're going to get help. Real help. Can you wait a few more days?" Michelle's eyes filled with tears. "I've waited 20 years. What's a few more days?" But then her expression hardened. "But you need to know something. Father Samuel has connections on the outside. Police, officials, people who help keep this place hidden. Going to local authorities might not work. He always knows. He always finds out." A whistle sounded from across the compound. Michelle's face went pale. "I have to go. Please, if you're going to help, do it fast. Before he realizes someone is asking questions. Before— Michelle! A man's voice called from somewhere in the compound. Hard, commanding, angry. Michelle grabbed her bucket and ran, leaving Sarah and Diana crouched by the fence, hearts pounding. They heard the man's voice again, closer now. Questioning Michelle, asking who she had been talking to. They heard Michelle's denial, her frightened insistence that she had been alone, and then they heard something that made Sarah's blood freeze. Search the perimeter. Someone was here. Sarah and Diana ran, through the fog, through the forest, branches whipping their faces, their breaths ragged with fear and exertion. Behind them, they heard dogs, voices, the sound of people crashing through undergrowth. They had been discovered, and now the question wasn't just whether they could help Michelle Prescott and the others trapped in that compound. The question was whether they could escape the wilderness alive. Because Father Samuel didn't let threats to his control walk away, and Sarah and Diana had just become the biggest threat he had faced in 20 years. Could they make it back to the plane before the 3-day deadline? And even if they did, would anyone believe what they had found in the depths of the Alaskan wilderness? If this story left you as impacted as it did me, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment your opinion below. Each comment is like a new piece that can help unravel other mysteries like this one.